Well, this past Saturday, Paul the Irish Dragon Felder announced his retirement on the UFC broadcast. He also stated in a tweet, it's been a great ride. I want to thank all my supporters. I will miss making that walk, the smell of fresh leather gloves, the countdown to walk. I'll miss the weight cuts a bit too. But he really has thought this through, and it's time. Thank you. And so that was his, official tweet to the fans. Obviously, on the broadcast, he gave a little bit of backstory saying that he kind of felt it during the Dan Hooker fight and then got a little fire back before the RDA fight, but then he's just really been enjoying life, and did another media interview where he talks about, his father. And he said that his father would probably say something along the lines of it would be time for him to retire. So I think this is probably a legit retirement. I don't see Paul Felder coming back out of retirement. You can never say that in MMA, but I get that impression. Drake, what are your thoughts on this? Because I think this really is him hanging it up and going full time into commentary, and him being satisfied with that.
Yeah, never say never, but when you're in kind of the spot that he is in, I think I believe him a bit more than anybody else, maybe, if depending, right? So when he made this announcement live on air, wasn't all that surprised by it, because he kind of hinted at it right after the Dan Hooker fight, obviously leaving his gloves in there. That was like a half retirement, right? And then he wasn't even committal to coming back afterward. He just ended up doing the short notice fight with RDA, which was just kind of to do it. See what he said, to see like if he still had that fire and that feeling, and it just wasn't there. And that was a good sign for him, which this whole thing is very, very refreshing, I think, to see somebody be so real about this and kind of understand, all right, I don't want to fight. I shouldn't then. And, I don't have to. Like, he's in one of the better positions, obviously, with the commentary gig. Like you said, he gets to work a lot and do so many other things now than just be a fighter. That really makes the decision easier, I'm sure, than if he didn't have these luxuries. So, there's that. But it's just nice to see somebody not do something that they don't want to anymore, right? Like, that's always a big plus. And it's more refreshing for him to feel that way when he is ranked in the top 10. And as he said, holding up a spot, and he doesn't want to do that. Like, just everything about it makes you feel like, all right, he's doing this the right way on his terms, not overstaying his welcome. As he also mentioned, like that he thinks some other people are, I don't remember if he named names, but of course we have people in mind who we will think of. So yeah, man, it's, I'm happy for him. I think he had a solid career in the UFC, and just overall, was never the very best guy. He'll admit that himself, but was always fun to watch. And he's a good listen on commentary. I think entertaining to listen to, and knows his stuff. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy for Paul. I'm glad to see that he's not going to be one of those guys, at least so right now. We'll see what happens down the line. If he gets that itch again, hopefully not. But like you said, I do believe him, all things considered, a bit more than I would others.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where if I'm being honest here, right? Like, I don't believe he would have, if he had decided to stick around, I don't believe he would have ever had, a belt around his waist. I think he probably would have hovered in that top 10. Could have fought some more at welterweight, which he moved up to, but even then, it's, not exactly a lot left for him to prove in the octagon, and not a lot left for him to do other than just to fight because he would love to fight and want to get paid to fight, right? So I agree with pretty much all the statements that you said in terms of this seems more realistic. It seems, given everything that he's, just the way that he announced the retirement, it really does seem like, nah, he's done. He's over it. He's done fighting, and he's walking away. And I think he's 35. So, I mean, that's a good age, I think, to do it, because 35 or 36, because a lot of times
37.
when we see 30, he's 37. There you go. Yeah. I mean, that's a perfect age to do it, because it's the right time. We see far too many fighters continue to go on past their prime, or as they're, in their decline, so to speak, and they take unnecessary damage. They don't do that well. They get frustrated, and it's a mess. We see fighters stay in there a lot longer than they should the majority of the time. And so to see him step away now, again, another nice thing about this is even if in a year or two he might consider a comeback, it's unlikely because then he's pushing 40 and, you know, just physically, I think it would be harder for him to get back into camp and do that. So I don't see even a long retirement followed by a, hey, I want to step back in there type thing for him. It's not a guarantee. It is the fight game. Whether it's boxing or MMA or what have you, we've seen people come back way too many times to ever rule that out completely. But I like the call. I think he is a good commentator. I think he'll only continue to get better as he focuses on it more. And that's desperately needed because there are some other fighter commentators, I won't name names, that just kind of aren't my speed, where I like Paul Felder quite a bit more. So I like the move. I think he will stay retired. I guess one question I have, though, is if he had decided to stick around for one more fight, an official retirement fight, right? Because he did fight RDA on 5 days' notice, and then he's hanging him up. Who would have been the best opponent for him? What would have been that dream retirement fight in your eyes?
Good question. Well, one guy immediately jumped to mind, and I'm sure you know who I'm thinking of. And we talked about what's next for him recently after losing 3 in a row. And this originally, as we mentioned in that video about Tony Ferguson, neither of us really came to that conclusion of Paul Felder, but we knew a lot of people would probably like it. And I did see some comments on that video that did say Paul Felder and Ferguson was the fight to make next. But under the circumstances, as you just mentioned, for his retirement fight, and, even then when we mentioned it, I was like, I wouldn't want to see it for a main event. But, if you're going to make it his retirement fight and make it all special and all that, like, Tony's that guy, like I can't see that one not being as perfect while still respecting the structure of the division. Like I'm trying to think of everybody else around him right now, and that's the best name. Like you don't want to give him, and I know Makhachev just got an opponent, but like somebody like that, like,
yeah,
no, you want to have fun with it, right? Like that's something that nowadays we see the UFC so often do with some of these older fighters, put them against newcomers, and then they're stuck in that gatekeeperish role or whatnot. I mean, Cerrone's kind of got in there. He wasn't supposed to fight Alex Morono, but he ended up fighting him. Go down to strawweight. Jin Frey, despite getting the win, is perpetually stuck there, it seems, evidenced by her next matchup. Would have loved to see her versus Jessica Penne. That's exactly the fun I need from these older, former atomweight champions. But in this case, where if they were to admit retirement and go into it, sure about it and all that, I think Tony definitely, that makes the most sense with everything considered. Like I said, not the fight that naturally I would want, as we did mention in that video, but if it was to go in knowing what we're expecting out of it, I think that would just make it that much more better too, and like light a fire under both of them for sure. So
yeah, I like that call a lot. It was pretty much for me, it was either Tony or somebody else you mentioned in there that I think could be good, but it's hard to say because he's really struggled, and that's Cerrone. I think that's a fight that never.
They're like best friends. They're like best friends.
I know, but
the retirement aspect, right?
Yeah. Exactly, and that's the thing is
double retirement,
right? That I think that's why that appeals to me so much, is because if you know anything about Cerrone and Felder, especially Cerrone, I could totally see him fighting a friend for fun. Him and Robbie Lawler, they were very buddy going into that fight. They just had fun. Like I could easily see that being a great retirement fight for both guys, of just like, hey, let's just throw down one last time together and have that be a thing. I could really get behind that. And I think both guys would have been down. So that's kind of, for me, is the one, because I think it just would have been a great send off for both guys. I think it would have been competitive. I know Cerrone hasn't looked, like himself, but at lightweight, he's been far more competitive than at welterweight. And I think it could have been a good matchup. So I don't know. I personally would like to see that, but Ferguson is also a great call. We won't get either of those, unfortunately.
But Pat, before we wrap up here, instead of speaking fantasy, let's go with what was the best Paul Felder fight. And here's the question: is it resoundingly, in terms of the best fight, is it the Dan Hooker fight, or is there another one that stands out to you?
Ooh, I
'Cause
mean,
for me, I think it's that one.
for me, it's one I saw live. That was for me, it's for the best Felder fight. It's against Charles Oliveira, man. I
That's
mean,
definitely his best win in hindsight.
yeah, I mean, best win in hindsight, but also just that performance. I mean, Felder was on recently, right? It's been decisions for the last 5 fights or so. Split, a lot of split decisions, but
Since that fight, since the Oliveira one.
since that fight, yeah. But before that, I mean, that's the thing. That was the last Paul Felder, TKO, KO, like run, and in his run of knocking people out, and that was a amazing performance. And yes, now technically a win over the now champion. I mean, Felder could have easily stood on a podium and banged and said, "Hey, you gave Bisping Dan Henderson. I'm at least the top 10. Let's do this." And who knows? Because he's a company man. So you never know. I mean, that would have been interesting. So, but yeah, that to
Olive's
me
last loss as well.
exactly.
Which is insane.
It's crazy, but there's a lot of intrigue there. So I think that's my favorite fight of his. But for you, it's Dan Hooker, and which is a great fight too. I mean, you can't.
Yeah, I mean, and for me, I think the best fights are always the ones that are most competitive and action packed, and I think that one was great. And I mean, that Oliveira fight was very fun too, because obviously you remember, but the people watching, like, he survived on the ground with Oliveira, and that's how he ultimately finished him, with those beautiful elbows. And the fight before that also stands out to me, when he beat Stevie Ray with the elbows again. Like, there was that period where he was just smashing dudes with the elbows and punches
all day.
I mean,
yeah.
that was really fun stuff to watch. So I mean, I did like all those fights on when he kind of started to find his footing, because obviously he came into the UFC with I think it was short notice in that Jason Sago fight, split decision there. And then of course the highlight reel spinning back fist against Danny Castillo, and then obviously dropped the Barboza. And that Pearson fight was actually very fun. Now that I see that right there on his record, I remember that one. But those 2 losses are like, okay, I think we see Paul Felder might not be a guy he can't hang with these guys right now. It's hard to tell at that point, I remember, but then after that rattled off a bunch, and arguably could have been on a 7-fight winning streak. There was the Francisco Trinaldo doctor stoppage in there, which is from that cut. So like, when you really break it down, he was on a very, very good run there for a bit, and then obviously culminated with the Oliveira TKO, and had the Mike Perry welterweight fight mixed in there, which kind of hurts when you just look at it. But again, for lightweight, not so much. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good options to choose from, obviously, but out of all of those, I think the Dan Hooker fight as a fight, that one was fantastic. I love that fight. So
yeah, agreed. Overall, as a fight, that's definitely, I would say that's probably the best one as an overall fight, rather than just a Felder performance. Right. So let us know in the comments your favorite Paul Felder fight. Let us know who you would have liked to see him have a retirement fight against, your feelings on Paul Felder, hanging up the gloves for good, moving into commentary full time. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe button, bell notifications, so you know when we're dropping the latest content. And yeah, hopefully he stays retired, and all the best to Paul Felder from here on out.